BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast. I'm Jane Lewis and it's time to turn our attention back to the men's national team.
It's good play by Mendes down the left. He gets the ball in. Ronaldo's there and he scores! Right on cue!
After 2 Nations League defeats and just 1 win in 14, it's a daunting trip to Zagreb next. But amid an injury crisis, could one of the new faces provide a spark for Steve Clarke's side?
McGree to the edge of the area, right-footed, shots it! Tapped in by Dork! Get it! Ben Dork has been the danger man!
And what sort of opposition will Croatia be?
After the bad Euros for Croatia, there is a sense that some sort of redemption should be going on, and this streak of games is a perfect occasion for Vrdoljak and for the rest of the national team to implement some new ideas.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Hello there, welcome along. Delighted to say that former Scotland captain Gemma joins us. Gemma, 203 caps, you're well placed to talk about all things Scotland. In a word, how are you feeling about this latest match, this latest challenge for Scotland?
Unsure.
Good. Nice to start off on a positive.
I'm usually really positive. I'm really positive. But the amount of injuries that are out there, it's difficult. It's difficult to be anything other than unsure.
No, I think you make a good point. A lot of injuries, and of course that the form's not been great either. Much to discuss with Gemma. We'll look at an exciting looking weekend in the SWPL as well. We're going to hear from the Croatian journalist Juraj Vrdoljak. But first of all, let's quickly run through the Scottish football headlines. Well, Norwich midfielder Kenny McLean says Scotland are desperate to end their poor run of results when they take on Croatia in the Nations League on Saturday. The game will only be available to watch on YouTube as Viaplay haven't sold the rights to the match to another broadcaster. Inverness Caledonian Thistle manager Duncan Ferguson says if the club goes into administration as expected, the resultant 15-point deduction would make it nearly impossible to avoid a second successive relegation. For more on the situation at the Highland Club, listen to yesterday's episode of the Scottish Football Podcast. Ian McCall has left his position as Clyde manager by mutual consent following a disappointing start to the season for the League Two side. And Motherwell forward Laura Berry has been named September's SWPL Player of the Month. OK, so it's Croatia against Scotland, 5 o'clock kickoff on Saturday evening, match day 3 of the Nations League Group A. Gemma, we just spoke very briefly about your early thoughts for this one, but how do you see it going? What particular challenges will Scotland face in this one?
Where do we start? I don't want to start with the negatives, but let's start with the negatives. We haven't won in a long time. We had 1 win in 14, and it's been about a year since our last competitive victory. Now, we're very good at throwing facts around, and it's a bit more complex than that. I think that we weren't as a nation happy with what happened in the Euros. The squad weren't happy. Steve Clarke wasn't happy with what happened in the Euros. And I think that Steve Clarke has bought a lot of good favour with the Scottish public because of what he's done and what he's achieved. And I think if we'd come out of that and hadn't seen a reaction and some performances off the back of that, we would have been a bit of a different position. There's not many coaches out there that would be in post still with a stat like 1 in 14. The reason why it's complex is he's kind of doing this with one hand tied behind his back, in the amount of players that aren't available and haven't been available for a period of time. I was looking at those that are not available for this match, and even just in terms of a back line, we haven't had Aaron Hickey for a long time. We haven't had Nathan Patterson. We haven't had Kieran Tierney. We're now going to miss Jack Henry and Scott McKenna. We're going to miss Greg Taylor. We don't have Angus Gunn. When you set up for international matches, the first thing that I was always taught was the most important thing is don't concede. You don't concede, you're in with a chance. You've got a point. Now, you take that level of injury into any squad, it's really, really difficult. That being said, we still do have Craig Gordon. I'm loving that he's still there. I love that he's playing tricks with people's minds around about age and what that means when it comes to goalkeepers, and I love that. I think he'll start. We still have Anthony Ralston. Now, you can either... He's not Marmite, but he's one of these players which, you know, he's got mistakes in him, but he's so resilient. And as long as we can get a game out of him where we take out some of those mistakes, I think he's solid for what we have available. We've got Andy Robertson. He's our captain. He's our leader. We've got opportunities in the back line for like John Souttar to come in and stake a claim. We don't have John McGinn, who is the heart and soul and engine room, but we've got Billy Gilmore and McTominay. So for every challenge that you have, there's positives in there. But the problem is if they get injured or something happens to them, and if they're not a top game, we are really, really limited in terms of what we can bring in. So this is why it's complex, is you need everybody on that pitch to have the best game. You can't afford for somebody not to pitch up and not just individually have a best game, but collectively as a team find that rhythm. And there's enough players there that are familiar enough to that Scotland squad, that have the experience enough in that Scotland squad that can put in the performance. And that's the key thing. We do need the performance. That's like the non-negotiable. The result, would we take a 0-0? Absolutely. Would we take a 1-0 loss if it's really, 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 really positive and we know it's just this one thing? If that turns out, we'll go, maybe. Would we take a 1-0 loss when we're absolutely played off the park and we can't see any way forward? No, that's when it's going to be a problem, I think.
Yep.
But saying that, the time is ticking here. I think by the end of these 4 games, we'll have a real clear understanding of what position the Scottish national team are in and what position that kind of head coach position's in. And I don't think Steve Clarke's under any illusions. He's a smart guy. He'll get that. But this is a complex set of fixtures, bearing in mind who we're playing, even with our best teams. But add to that the fact that we have this kind of demon of not winning games and the complex injury list that we have.
Yeah, we did lose our last 2 games, but I think it's fair to say, and you talk about performance, that there were some signs that there were pretty positive performances amongst those 2 defeats. So how much does Steve Clarke take from that, and what does he take forward into Croatia off the back of that?
Yeah, you talk about I was really positive after the Poland game at home. Like I was confused. I think somebody asked me about that performance. I was like confused. I don't know how we didn't win that. And I was positive after the Portugal game. When but you're up against Portugal, stacked, absolutely stacked in terms of quality of that team. We took it to them. So I think when you look at matches and performances, the first thing you look at, is there a trend there? Like, is there anything that we can hold on to that shows us we're going in the right direction? And I think that you could. And everybody thought before, we talked about it before the first match against Poland, and I said it as well, is what else can Steve Clarke get out this team? What else can he do? It's the same players. We were disappointed with the team selection. Steve Clarke doesn't like change. He likes to put his faith in those that knows. And do you know what? They went on there and they showed us something different, something that we hadn't seen in Euros. And I think most of us put our hands up and says, you know what? We didn't actually expect that performance. Yes, we lost it. Yes, we have no idea how we lost it. But you know what? The performance was something we didn't expect. I think we got the same again with Portugal. And I think there was this feeling of we were unlucky not to take something out of that game. So that kind of trend in terms of performance and the feeling that we get as the public around about what our national team are doing, I think is really, really important. And I think Steve Clarke can take that. And Steve Clarke's he's been in this game a long time. He understands how this works, both in terms of on the pitch and off the pitch. If you had any, and I don't see any sense of this, and I don't hear anything about this, of any sort of disillusionment amongst the players. I don't hear about any disillusionment amongst the playing staff. And even though we have to talk about the fact that we're losing, if you were to talk to the general Scottish public, I'm not sure you would have that much disillusionment based on these last 2 performances. Yeah. I think there would be a level of understanding. It's just how long does that level of understanding last? And then the final point around that is, if it's not Steve Clarke, who is it? And I know some chatter in the background about who that could be, Davy Moyes, for example. But I think that he's earned the right to have the backing of us for a bit longer.
Let's talk about some players who we could see on the pitch on Saturday. Ben Doak is an exciting young talent. He obviously did pretty well when he came on against Portugal. He's also crucially been getting more game time with Middlesbrough as well. Is he the kind of player, he is exciting, but could he realistically have an impact in these games, you think?
I think so. And we saw that when he came on in terms of his turn of pace, his ability to get at players. I think we've talked about for as long as I can remember, we're lacking players that really, take people on in the modern game. It's just pass. Bendok's that guy. He's young, he's fearless, and he's got quality. And we saw the impact that he had when he came on. So he's definitely that kind of player that, even though we have these level of injuries, he's one that we're absolutely delighted he's back in the squad, and I would expect him probably to start against Croatia.
Shea Adams and Scott McTominay, you've already spoken briefly about him, obviously made impressive starts to their new careers in Italy with Torino and Napoli respectively, and they both could be quite key because obviously they come with experience and they're coming into these games in pretty good form.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things is experience is huge in this, but they now have added something else to their game, which is they've gone and they've shown their adaptability to go into a new environment, 2, a new kind of style and tempo of a league, but 3, go in there and make an instant impact. That is not easy to do. So it shows you something about the mentality of these guys and their ability to adapt to situations which are not usual for them, or to try and overcome adversity. Because every time you go into somewhere, yes, people want you to do well, but there's always those people that are looking at you thinking, I'm just waiting for you to trip up. So that type of mentality throughout the team is only something positive for Scotland, I think.
Well, you're probably wondering what sort of opposition Croatia will be. Let's find out, shall we? Phil Goodlad has been speaking to the Croatian journalist Juraj Vrdoljak.
Juraj, we are struggling at the moment in the men's national side. Tell me, please, that you see this being a very comfortable win for Scotland.
Well, yeah, Croatia actually doesn't have a good track record against Scotland. So that might be more than decent thing for Scotland to hold on to, even, with all the troubles that the Scottish national team has at the moment. I think that the track record is still fairly good against Croatia. So that's one thing you have on your side.
Yeah, 2 wins, 3 draws and a defeat, the recent record for Scotland. What you're saying to us is that Scotland is Croatia's bogey team.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, fortunately enough, the win at the Hampden Park 3 years ago at the Euros was a pretty good substitute for all the painful defeats in the qualifiers as well, under Igor Stimac back in the day. So, yeah, I mean, not a great record, as I've mentioned, but hopefully, from Croatian side, it's going to be better after Saturday.
Now, I didn't want to mention the Hampden meeting at the last Euros, but you've gone and burst that particular bubble. Modric was phenomenal that night.
Picked up by Petkovic, rolls it back to Kovacic. Now it's with Modric. Goal! What a strike it is! It's vintage Modric, and it's a heartbreaker for Scotland, whose dream of getting through the groups in a major tournament has just moved further away from them. The dazzling feet of Luka Modric, outside of the right boot, top left bin.
I wonder, though, if he enjoyed playing against Scotland, because we seem to give him the freedom of Hampden.
Yes, that's one thing you don't want Luka Modric to have. A lot of time on the ball, a lot of time to kind of pick his options. He's still pretty much controlling the whole midfield in Croatia, and that's still 3 years on. He's now reaching his 40th birthday almost, so he's still pulling the strings. He still has the will and the urge to still give his best on the pitch, and he's still the main player of this squad. And definitely, as it was 3 years ago, it's still on now. You really don't want to give him that much time on the ball. You can see his performances in Real Madrid, so he's still our most important player.
Yeah, he played the full match and scored the winner against Poland in Croatia's last outing.
Exactly.
What sort of form do we find the Croatian national side in just now?
Well, the head coach, Zlatko Dalic, celebrated his 7th year on the bench just earlier this week. So that's one occasion. When he arrived 7 years ago, the Croatia was pretty much in a state of distress. The qualifiers for the World Cup in 2018 weren't going well. He only came to the squad as a surprise prior to the playoff games against Ukraine, took the team at the World Cup in 2018, and we all know what happened since then. So this Euros this summer were were really a bit of a disappointment for Croatia going out in the group stage, especially with the new format. That was something I think a few believed was going to happen. So there's kind of this sense that a certain redemption after the bad Euros for Croatia and for both Dalic. There is a sense that some sort of redemption should be going on. And this streak of games is a perfect occasion for Dalic and for the rest of the national team to kind of implement some new ideas. Because in the recent past, under Dalic he's very, very reliant on his senator players. Luka Modric, Ivan Perisic hasn't played basically since he's left Spurs. We're talking about the past year, but he still believes in him. He still does not want him to retire from the national team, even though he's 36 and injured. So that's one thing that kind of really didn't help Croatia to move on, to bring in some new, fresh talents. But at the moment, we're looking at some new reinforcements, some new ideas. Croatia actually resorted to back three, which is a huge... Croatia is now playing with a back three, the back line. So that's a huge kind of a new thing that's been introduced.
And is that as a direct consequence of your poor Euros campaign? Because you lost... Now, remind me, you lost 3-0 to Spain,
yes,
and you drew with Albania and Italy. So
yes,
switching to the back three, is that because of your poor showing in the summer?
Not mainly because of the poor performances at the Euros, but because of the biggest strength lies in the back line, because the quality of the player is the highest in the back line. We have the structure of the team really complements the idea of playing with a three in the back. Now we are going to field the three that consists of Joško Gvardiol from Man City, Josip Šutalo from Ajax, who caught his form in the Ajax, and Duje Tacar from Lyon. And they seem to be getting the gist of it. They're all perfectly aware of what playing with three in the back means. It's still a bit wobbly, but against both Portugal in the second half especially, and against Poland at home, you could tell that it's improving. And as much as I can see that being a kind of a chance for Scotland, that they still kind of are getting used to the play with the three in the back, I think it's beginning to shape up quite good for Croatia.
Juraj, you mentioned a chance for Scotland, and on this podcast, I like diplomacy to be dispelled with, and I'd like you to tell it how it is. And be honest, when you drew Scotland in this Nations League, you're thinking, okay, well, that's probably a much easier game than it is against Poland and against Portugal. Is the view in Croatia, now that you've made the changes and you've switched to a back three, that actually playing Scotland this weekend is a good chance for you to maybe bed in a system against a side that may not hurt you as much as the other two would in the group?
No, I mean, yes, the recent form is one thing, and it could easily get a team like Croatia very complacent, but I don't get the feeling that anyone from the Croatian side is taking, even with the poor run of form, no one is taking the game light or easy or something that we might build a goal difference on. Not in the slightest. Scotland, you always have this idea of a team that it's not in a great form, but it's now a passing thing. I believe so. The form is always going to be wobbly for the likes of Scotland, but you don't want to be that team that kind of turns the fortunes up for those likes of scenes. So I think, especially with the home crowd, I think that Croatia is kind of very focused on the game against Scotland, and I think that there's going to be no room for places, because as I mentioned, Croatia also has kind of a depth to settle after the Euros, and so they need to prove themselves as well.
Juraj, I'm enjoying talking to you, not least your description of Scotland over the last 14 games. The form has been merely wobbly, as opposed to some of the other descriptions that I've heard about the form. Time is beating us. Can I just ask you finally, how do you think the game will go in Zagreb, and where do you see Scotland having a chance to end this run?
To put a short transition, Scotland will need to be fast on the transitions. Croatia will take the possession. Croatia will try to score as soon as possible, because that's one thing that brings out the nervousness from the game if you're a favourite. But Scotland has, if they can use their opportunities with the transition, I think the Scotland needs to be fast on the break, and also if they manage to get a set piece close to the Croatian goal, I think that's where the chances lie. I mean, Vrdoljak is really great in the air, but there's been some issues with Croatia defending the set pieces. So those are the two things that I might see Scotland do well, or the biggest chance to hurt Croatia.
Juraj Vrdoljak, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Scottish Football Daily Podcast.
Thank you for having me, and good luck.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
That's the Croatian journalist Juraj Vrdoljak there. Let's just finally, Gemma, before we go, there's a full card in the SWPL this weekend and a couple of pretty significant games, actually, at Ibrox. First against second as Rangers take on Glasgow City, two informed teams. And that's got the makings of being a really, really important and a decent game too.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's really interesting, the top of the SWPL league. It doesn't look particularly familiar. For the last couple of seasons, we've got Rangers at the top, City second, Hearts third, and Celtic languishing in fourth, should I say. Before I get any abuse, you've got a game in hand. You've had a pretty good the European run, but that's a new challenge for them. So yeah, that for me, this league is sort of wide open. There's contenders in that kind of top four or top five, and any of those teams are capable of taking points off anyone else. So. Really interesting, but Rangers have just been banging the goals in for fun. Celtic they probably should have won that game against Celtic in the Old Firm. They didn't. Celtic showed a level of resilience there to come back into it. But let's just see how that goes because Rangers have been scoring for fun. But Glasgow City, to be fair to them, they are the team that everybody writes off and say, oh, if Celtic and Rangers are going to run away with it, those teams are, they've reinvented themselves again. It is like what they do. They morph into something else. And this will be an interesting test for them.
Yeah, and you can argue they are the informed team at the minute. On Sunday, it's third against fourth. And maybe a chance, obviously, with Celtic having played that European game and maybe the disappointment that they'll maybe still be feeling in that. Maybe a chance for Hearts to really make a statement, do you think? You know what,
it's Celtic are finding now the requirement to have strength and depth in the squad. But even that, the emotional tiredness that comes from playing in moments like that starts to catch up with you, and this is going to be something new for them. So yes, you won the league last year and you got pushed all the way. Now you're going to get pushed all the way whilst playing in the top 16 competition in Europe against some of the best teams. And I watched the game on Thursday, and Celtic put a hell of a lot of effort into that game and got nothing out of it. There was a lot of running without the ball. There was a lot of energy expended. So this is going to be really interesting to see how Celtic recover from that, because if you look at that top end of the table, there's no guarantee for European football next year. And their main goal, yes, they want to retain their title, but at a bare minimum, they need to be in that top two. And that looks pretty tough at this moment in time.
Yeah, it's going to be an intriguing weekend in the SWPL. Right, we better wrap things up now. Thanks to Gemma and also to Juraj Vrdoljak as well. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast as well. Remember that you might not be able to watch Croatia against Scotland on a linear broadcaster, but you can hear full live commentary on BBC Radio Scotland on Saturday. The programme gets underway at 2:00. Extensive coverage and live updates on the BBC Sports Scotland website as well and the mobile app. The SWPL highlights will be on BBC Scotland channel and iPlayer from 7:00 on Monday evening. And of course, the Scottish Football Podcast will be here every day. So if you haven't already done so, then please subscribe on BBC Sounds. That's it from us all. Good luck to Scotland.
This is the shocking moment English football has been dreading.
My name is Moses Swabu, and I used to be a professional footballer. But then I got in deep with organised crime and became a match fixer operating in the English League.
A match-fixing investigator has highlighted 2 matches he says appear to have suspicious betting patterns.
How honest are you going to be with me?
This is 100%. Join me for Sports Strangest Crimes presents Confessions of a Match Fixer. Listen on BBC Sounds.